Welcome, everyone. Good morning. My name is Pierre Milette. I'm CTO at ACEA. It's my pleasure to welcome you all today to one of the many events that take place over the course until mid-December at this ACEA Experience Center, to this event about China specifically. Now, before I go on and do an introduction, I'd like to do just a brief bit of housekeeping. Those who are familiar with the city, and especially with this part of the city, will know that hardly a week goes by without a demonstration. We're expecting today farmers to come and demonstrate. I think there's going to be a bit less action than last spring, I hope at least. We expect the demonstration to start about 11 and to take place towards the European Commission. But look, it's possible that there might be a bit of noise here at some point. But if it does happen, it should be towards the end of the event. So please don't be alarmed if this is the case. But in any case, so this being said, again, thank you very much for joining us, China event. The idea behind this event, ACEA, of course, I think many of you in this room will know us for our European activities, our European membership. What may be a bit less known is the fact that we have an office in Beijing, actually, and we've had an office in Beijing for 20 years. It's actually celebrating its anniversary in December. And of course, nowadays in Brussels, throughout Europe and elsewhere in the world, everybody likes to talk about China, especially if you're in the auto industry, Chinese EV, the Chinese industry, European manufacturers also doing business in China. Everybody likes to talk about China, but we don't hear so much, it seems, from people who very much know China. So we thought, how about we change this a little bit? We shift gears and we let actual Chinese people tell you about China, and people from the industry talk to you about the industry. Because I think that there are two major, let's say, questions that arise nowadays when in Europe, in the context of the auto industry, we talk about China. Number one, what is it that the Chinese industry is doing? What is Chinese policy? What are Chinese manufacturers doing in China? But also, why are we starting to see them coming to Europe? What's the plan? What's the strategy? What's the motivation here? And number two, also, what is it that European manufacturers do in China? Our members have been truly at the forefront of this boom, of this expansion, of almost the start, really, of the Chinese automotive market starting 20-ish years ago. And it also remains a key and gigantic market. It is certainly in the world one of the most dynamic, one of the largest, and now I think it is actually the largest market, or maybe second to the US, I can't recall. And also one of the most technologically forward and innovative market nowadays. Things have changed very quickly. They're still changing today. China today is not the China of 10 or 20 years ago, obviously. But so, and enough with my little speech. I'd rather quickly introduce our speakers and let them go ahead. The plan being today that we're going to get two presentations. First one from Mr. Bahong, who is Senior Director, Government Affairs at Volkswagen Group in China, who will be telling you about Chinese policy, how the industry works in China. And he will be followed by our head of office in Beijing, Zhang, Shuo, who will then present about our members, about their activities, and also about what's going on with the industry and what gets this industry going in China and elsewhere. And then towards, I would say, probably half an hour, 30 minutes from now, then we will have a Q&A session, an open Q&A. So please, if questions come to your mind, make sure to remember them. Make a note if you need. We'll be happy to take questions and to get the discussion going. We want this discussion to be somewhat informal. It's not this very official setting, so I want to give everyone a chance to be involved in this discussion. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Mr. Su to the stage. Thank you.
So good morning. I want to first thank ACEA for inviting me over. And also, I think this is a great opportunity for all of us here for an exchange, as the industry, as you all know it, has been caught off guard by massive waves of transformations, and also not just technical transformations, but of course also geopolitics, like you or not. So in terms of food for thought, my presentation will be the appetizer, whereas Mr. Zhang will be the main course later. But again, before I get started, there's something I cannot stress enough, that although I do work for Volkswagen Group, My presentation here today does not by any means represent the official views or positions of my employer. Yeah, so a brief political overview of China, but of course there's also information about the industry. Primarily, my presentation consists of two parts. Number one, how the Chinese government works and how it impacts or affects our industry. And number two, the shifting dynamics for foreign OEMs or car companies in China. So a quick glance at China, vast, diverse, and also unbalanced. And how do I mean by that? What I'm trying to say is it's not a monolith, right? And it's quite obvious. So, for example, almost everybody out of the 1.4 billion population lives in the red zone, right? I mean, it's not a new thing. I mean, it's been like that throughout China, primarily due to the geographical traits of the country, because the yellow part is mostly deserts or mountains or plateaus, stays super high above sea level. And then again, I mean, although China is the world's second largest economy, there are approximately 600 million people who earn less than 145 euros per month. Right? I mean, I'm not going to expand on that. I know we probably don't have time to let that fully sink in, but just try imagining for a while yourself being in the shoes of the leadership, and what would you do? Come next slide. And I think that the hierarchy pyramid is pretty straightforward, so I've not explained that. So basically, the leadership reaches out to a vast pool of experts, and it could be other bureaucrats, it could be the academia, it could be the industry. So they consult with all these key sectors, and everybody chip in and to collect information, ideas, concept, primarily just to help drive the country move forward and move forward better. And then they based on the information that they got, they would devise strategies and figure out ways for the government to implement. So this is a very simplified version of how it works. So 2049 will mark the centennium of the PRC, the People's Republic. So the government has set 3 visions or 3 goals for 2049 for the entire country. Number one is tech development, right? Because leadership firmly believes that's the only way for China to circumvent or sidestep the so-called middle income trap. And second, to forge, I mean, it's a more balanced social wealth distribution. And the third is a more appropriate role for China in the international arena. So these are the 100-year goals. So following that, the first vision, tech is the ultimate means to move China forward. So we've taken key indicators out of China's official 14th 5-year plan. Some numbers, of course. So for the current 5-year plan period, for example, the plan says R&D expenditure during this 5-year round will need to increase by 7%. And for state-owned enterprises, they are under a stronger mandate, over 7%. And for example, strategic emerging industries, which includes e-mobility, collectively need to account for more than 17% of GDP, and so on and so forth. So this is all about tech. But then let's take our industry as an example. So the dark blue patches, gives you the government targets. For example, government previously thought, by 2020, the total sales of e-cars should be 2 million. 2025, new energy vehicle market share should be over 20%, right? And then China put together like a combination of different policy and monetary incentives. So the sales subsidy, we all know that, which was terminated already last year. And then tax exemption, credit quota, which actually modeled from the Californian ZAV regime. And then conventional vehicle purchase and use restrictions. Like, for example, if you don't drive a e-car in certain big cities, you won't be able to drive it every day. So on and so forth. So we call it push and pull, right? But now China has primarily transitioned to a market-driven development of e-mobility instead of policy. But in the very beginning, where when the market failed, right, the government stepped in and pushed it forward. And for connected vehicles, the government and also pulled a lot of resources, but the government knows that they won't be able to inject the same amount of money into that. So they work more on the regulatory side. And Vision 2 for the sustainable social structure. See these the trend lines, right? The upper line represent urban disposal income, and the lower line curve represents rural, like farmers. Right? So as you can see, from 2014 all the way to 2023, the gap did not widen. Did not narrow, but actually widened. And then if you look at the table on the right-hand side, the GDP per capita, varies a great deal among big major cities in China. So basically, China wants to be more like Europeans instead of North Americans. Eventually, that's the policy goal. I don't think I have to expand on it. This is the heart of the European Union. So basically, what I'm trying to say is, the Chinese government, is fully aware of what's going on, and of course, they want to hedge against international, geopolitical risks. And one of their fundamental strategies is to stay open. That's what they say, right? From my perspective, personally, I do believe they mean it, right? But just how investors feel about it is a different matter. But policy-wise, this is what they're trying to do, is to stay open. Right. It's a very quick summary of the situation right here in China. So these are, like the page in the morning, pretty fresh data. So these up to maybe September. So one indicator that I want to bring your attention to is FDI, the foreign direct investment, which has plummeted. The minus 54.7%. China used to be the number one, the magnet of foreign investment, but now due to various reasons, it has plummeted. And the government is trying to stabilize foreign investment, of course. So, the government has come up with a series of maneuvers, to tackle short-term issues for economic stability, and especially since September 24th. I think has caught the attention of the whole world, but eventually how these will pan out, we'll have to see, right? Right now, it's too early to tell. So this comes to the second part of my presentation, the shifting dynamics of OEMs in China. So in the past, tech were the strongest appeals for foreign companies, but things have changed. My employer went to China 40 years. We are going to celebrate the 40th anniversary of Volkswagen in China next month in December. So of course, back then, whatever we brought to China, could be cars, it could be money, it could be expertise. Those were extremely new to the Chinese people and government and regulators. But throughout the years, the Chinese caught up pretty fast. And so in general, the wealth of China 2003 versus 2023, 2023, you can see that GDP has increased by almost 12 folds, whereas foreign currency reserve has grown by more than 7 folds. And another one that's also very telling is the Chinese companies. So Fortune 500 chart. So in 2003, there's 0 Chinese companies on top 10. And the highest ranking company at that point was China National Petroleum, ranking 69th. Whereas by last year, there are 3 out of the top 10, and a total of 142 Chinese companies topping that chart. I mean, granted, these 3 are, like big SOEs, utility companies, but there are a lot of car companies too on the making it to the top 500. So, I mean, Zhang Shuo will probably elaborate a little more and better in his presentation on the industry landscape, but I think just a very quick look at the chart, gives you an idea of how dominant Chinese companies are, and especially in the area of mobility. So this is how fast e-cars have, taken market share. I mean, the world's largest car market. I mean, remember what I just said about the government hoping, by 2025 it's 20%. That's almost 36% last year. So it overshot. I mean, it's gone beyond everyone's expectations. And then the pie chart shows you, the BYD, of course, right? It's the lion's share. That used to be us, right? And the top selling models. But there's a lot of plug-in hybrids, but I would not elaborate here. So given China's continuous rise, edges us are being slowly eroded. So I mean, I took a snapshot of the CNBC report. I mean, it gives you a very rough idea, right? And this is called red flag. Obviously an executive limo, for the government officials, and this is a very good photo. Whoever came up with this piece, hats off to that guy. So China's rise in wealth, tech, confidence, sense of pride, sensitivity of security, domestic, international politics, etc., may all have contributed to the waning of foreign companies' overall influence, right? And but on the other hand, the model of joint ventures, with R&D competence primarily based away from China, I mean, it has actually not helping foreign OEMs in China to catch up. However, foreign investment tech are still very important for China, right? I mean, it's widely acknowledged as not only a key contributor to economic growth, but also a stabilizer in international relations. So, I mean, I work in the area of government relations, so everywhere we go, I mean, when we meet with Chinese senior officials or industry leaders, they would, no exception, would acknowledge our contribution in helping China shape the modern car industry, everyone, I mean, the ASEAN member companies. It's widely acknowledged, I mean, sincerely acknowledged. They've been telling us, please catch up, speed up, because this is the message they've been sending to us. So, in summary, fits China's political and economic interests. I mean, they do mean it. Right? I mean, I'm not here. I'm not employed by the government, of course. I'm employed by Volkswagen. I'm just, again, from my standpoint, I do believe that that's what they mean. They mean it. And also, from a very objective point of view, China remains a powerhouse and largest market of our industry. And also, we will have to face fierce competition in the era of NEV and connected vehicles. Already facing the competition. But for us, stay close or stay alive in the market, which is one of the hubs for innovation. We have to stay competitive in both technology and cost. Otherwise, be extremely challenging for us. So, well, thank you for your attention. That's the presentation for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Su. I think what this brings up, what this makes, I hope, a little bit more apparent or obvious, is that very often we tend to see China indeed as a kind of monolith, as you were saying. One thing, but there's a lot more nuance. There's a lot more complexity to it. There's China the state, China citizen, China its industry, and even within that, there's granularity and there's a lot of details that are easy to overlook from afar. Now, you'll notice one thing also, of course, none of us here are government employees. The geopolitical aspect of the relations between China and Europe, China and the rest of the world, I think, are amply covered everywhere, and none of us are specialists of the matter. So today we've decided consciously to stay away from this and instead focus on the industrial question, which then leads us to the next presentation. I'd like to welcome Zhang Shuo, our head of office in Beijing at ACEA Beijing.
Thank you, Pierre, and thank you, Barclay. Thank you for your introduction. Just like Pierre has mentioned, ACEA Beijing Office will celebrate our 20 years anniversary this year. And I didn't change my job in the last 20 years, which means I joined ACEA at the very beginning. And it's very happy, very pleased to be here to share what the latest status of auto industry in China and what make China's auto industry evolve into what it is today, and what is the main drivers, main factors, and main enablers. And I'm very much looking forward to free discussion afterwards. And one more thing is, my English is not as good as my colleagues Pierre and Barclay. If you didn't catch my point, just immediately ask me in Chinese. That's a bit better. So I will starting from a couple of slides regarding the data and facts about the latest status of China auto industry. This is the first 10 months sales figure in China. You can see, although we see a very strong growth for the new energy vehicles in China, new energy vehicle is a very special term, which means BEV and PHEV. And we see a strong growth for new energy vehicles and exports, but I would say the economic situations in this country is not very good. We see a clear decline, especially for commercial vehicle market. It's almost 10% this year. But especially from this year, the development, the growth rate of new energy vehicles is developing at amazing speed. Starting from this August, the new energy vehicles market share in China is already exceed 50%. That's quite a lot. But you have to bear in mind, in the January, it's only 30%. And I would like to re-underline the developing mode and approach of e-mobility in China is very different from here in China. You can see the PHEV's developing speed is much higher than BEV, especially for this year. BYD, the new king, the new rock star in China, you can see this month for October, the monthly sales is over 500,000, and the majority of them are PHEV. This is the best selling top 10 BEV in China. Tesla is always the champion for over the years. And this is the best selling PHEV in China for the first half this year. It's a little bit boring. It's 6 out of 10 are BYD. But what I want to underline is that in China, the PHEV are very much different from here, from US, from Japan, from South Korea. For the first half of this year, the average E-range of PHEV is 115 kilometers, which is very long. And with such kind of PHEV, basically they can resolve every concern, problems where BEV have. You don't have concern about how to find a charging post. And another very important factor is in China, such kind of PHEV has the same price with BEV and ICE. And in China for this year, for every 2.6 new energy vehicles sold in China, there will be new charging piles installed in China. I think that is quite okay. Competitions is very fierce, which is reflects everywhere. You can see this is a development period for a new car, for new models, which is reduced by 20%. For domestic makers, it will only take 32 months to have a brand new car. For our joint ventures, it's a little bit longer. It's 38, but it's still quite faster than here. And from this year, there's a much more new models and a new the new update models put on the market. But in parallel, you can see for the blue line, the perfect margin is declined over the years because of the fierce competition. Actually, I'm quite concerned that the auto industry is no longer a profitable sector in China or maybe later in the world. As for autonomous driving and digitalizations in China, for the first half of this year, over 50% of new cars sold in China is equipped with a L2 or above ADAS systems. And if you stand on the street of Beijing and city, sometimes you can see this funny car sticker in the rear window, which means the car is driven by themselves. Please keep safe distance. And if you look at the different various car sales ranking list, you can find a very strange brand, Hima. Is there anyone know what is Hima? Hima actually is not a brand, it's not a manufacturer. Hima is a collection for the car models that is co-developed by Huawei and the different manufacturers. So the slogan of software design vehicles has turned to a reality somehow in China market. Actually, this chart has been shown by Bahong somehow. This is a sales figure of new energy vehicles in China over last 8 years. And the right line is sad story. It's a market share of international manufacturers in China. I would say, yes, the international manufacturers are losing our market share in China, but we can interpret in another way. It's not us, not international manufacturers lost market share in China. It's ICE lost the market. If you can produce a nice, beautiful new energy vehicle in China, that will be very popular. I have some slides later. So the development of new energy vehicle industry in China. I know there's a lot of reports, and the Commission also published a document regarding the investigation about the subsidies. But I think there are some other enablers which is also equally important for the development of new energies, like the competitions, patience, struggle, sacrifice, and aspirations. There's a lot of things I think is equally important for the development of the new energy vehicles in China. So what are those enablers? I would say my presentation is not cover everything. I just try to cover something that you might not very familiar with, because in Europe there's a lot of reports and analysis and debate about China. So let's back to the beginning. The beginning of this new millennium, the beginning of the year of 2000. You need to develop new energy vehicle or e-mobilities. You need humble and arrogant government officials. At the very beginning, actually, for the 2000 and 2001, the car industry developed very fast in China, but the officials clearly realized that China is facing great challenges. It depends too much on the import oil, and the pollution, the environment is getting increasingly serious. And for Chinese local manufacturers, it has nothing to do with the international competitiveness. So how to change these situations, how to address the challenges? So after thinking about those officials, they draw a conclusion that if Chinese auto industry someday want to be someone to gain the international competitiveness, it can not simply follow the track where European, Japanese, and American has already established a leading positions. China has to change another track. The e-mobility might be the future for China. So they even create a very famous slogan. It's called "Change Track, Overtake." But I would say at that moment, this concept, when this concept was raised by the Chinese government officials, which is caused a lot of debate, controversy, and questions, especially from the experts from the industry. They think those officials are too arrogant. It's a typical planning economist way of thinking. And for science and technology, there's no shortcut. It's not going to happen. But after years, after decades, I would say, it turns out both of them are wrong. Firstly, this is not a shortcut. It's a long journey. And secondly, at this moment, let's take a look about the global market. The China auto industry did not overtake anyone at this moment, I would say. This is a new energy vehicle sales from the year of 2009. From different report from the government authorities and also from the media, I think there's some conclusion that the policy, the China government is essentially control the policy and strategy of the sector and the company, Chinese company, to implement it. But I don't want the people here in Europe, our colleagues, have this impression that the government authority make a decision and they publish the strategy and go, and everything comes. This is not that easy. This is the main strategy, national level strategy regarding new energy vehicle published by Chinese government. Let's say for the year of 2012, the China published the first new energy vehicle development plan. They set the goal for the year of 2020, and the year of after that, the update for the new energy vehicle development plan for the year of 2035. And for this year, the central government published another new national level strategy. It's called Beautiful China Initiative. Actually, Bahong's presentation somehow touched this strategy, but those, I would say, those strategy and policy are not as mysterious or powerful as people think. Actually, the industry and the history is developed in an unexpected way. This is a market share, and this is a sales, and this is the fact. For the 2020 target, actually, the industry achieved in a very, very difficult way for the 2020 for the year of 2020. So around the year of 2018 and 2019, the Chinese government, MIT, and their colleagues start to preparing their update strategy for the year of 2035. And but at that moment, all the industry, including the government officials, are quite hesitant. They don't know if they made the right choice in the year around the year of 2006 to 2019. When they preparing the new policies, I would say they are even not dare to set a target for the year of 2030 and 2035. They only set up a very, very moderate target for the year of 2025. It's 20%. And they are still not very confident about the 20%. So in the text of this national strategy, they add another word in front of 20% is about 20%, which means 15% is about 20%. 14 is okay, still 20%. But surprisingly, this target was achieved 3 years early. You can see for the year of 2021, suddenly the industry, the new energy vehicle industry, is developing at a very fast speed. I am clear, remember at the moment, our colleagues from the government authority, they're quite surprised. What happens outside? Tell me. So this is the Again, sales figure and the growth rate. So you can see for the year of 2014, 2020, 21, and also for year of 2009, just a very important year for the development of China new energy vehicles. So what happens for this year? What are the main enablers again? The first thing is you need big man. But this Professor Van Gang, this big man is very short. Before before the year of 2000, he worked for Audi. He worked for Audi. After he back to China, he successfully convinced the Chinese government to include a new energy vehicle developing project into a national level technology and developing project, which is called 863 project. But this project is very similar with what we have. It's a Horizon 2020. It's the very same. And 7 years after, thanks to his significant contribution to this project, he was appointed as the Minister of Ministry of Science and Technology. And 2 years later, Mr. Van Gang used his knowledge, used his expertise, influence, and the reputations. He kicked off a very famous national level new energy vehicle pilot project, which is called 10 Cities, 1,000 Vehicles Initiatives. It's a very important moment for China auto industry. But at that moment, for me, I'm quite jealous of him. I think he just turned his personal hobby and task to the national strategy. Actually, before I joined ACEA, I worked for VW as well. And at that moment, my personal task and hobby is try to convince Chinese government and all the industry believe that diesel vehicle is the future, but it's totally different. Also, the biggest man in China, President Xi Jinping, has for the year of 2014, as you may recall, after China published the 2012 strategy, actually, you can see there's even a huge decline for the growth rate. And for these 2 following years, actually, there's no highlight, especially for the policy. And then people don't know where to go, what kind of policy we should have. And for the year of 14, Mr. Xi was invited by the Shanghai Motor, the SAC, to pay a visit to Shanghai Motor's factory. And in the factory, Mr. Xi delivered a very famous and important speech. Developing new energy vehicle is the only way to lead China's auto industry from big to strong. And right after he made this speech, 1 month later, the State Council published a brand new national overarching strategy to further promote the new energy vehicle development in China. And 2 months later, China implemented the nationwide new energy vehicle purchasing tax incentive policy and also the incentive policy for the charging infrastructures. To develop new energy vehicle, you have to be very rich. You can see for China, implement about 13 years long-term and nationwide unified incentive policy, which include purchasing subsidies. These subsidies are not the subsidies mentioned by the Commission, is subsidies for consumers. And another 13 years tax exemptions for new energy vehicles is 10% for the vehicle price. It's a long-term nationwide unified incentive policies for the demand side. Actually, Mr. Su just mentioned to development new energy vehicles, sometimes you need to be very poor. He just mentioned in China, in the year of 2020, 600 million people's monthly income is less than 130 euros. That's very low, which means in China, anything relevant to public service, the price have to be very low, which of course include the price of electricity. This is the electricity price in China. Basically, in Beijing, in China, if you drive a BEV, the cost for 100 kilometers in China is about less than 60 cents euro. I would say that is very much expensive for me. But it's not the case for Mr. Shuo, my colleague Pierre. Yes, of course, it's a very much it's a strong drivers for people to choose a BEV. The cost is quite low. You need decent people in China, especially for some mega city, Beijing and Shanghai. We implement very stringent vehicle purchasing limitation policies. In Beijing, you have to join a lottery, a qualified Beijing citizen, which means you have to stay Beijing for quite longer than 5 years, have to pay consecutive 5 years personal tax income. You are qualified to join the lotteries. To win a lottery, the percentage is 0.6%. And for a BEV vehicles, at this moment, you have to make applications and you have to wait online. Now it will take about 33 years to have a free number plate of BEV. But 4 or 5 years ago, it's only 1 month. So it's much easier. And for the Shanghai, for a ICE vehicles, you have to participate in an auction to buy a number plate, about 12,000 euros. It's even expensive than a car, but for a BEV, it's totally free. So of course, such kind of purchasing limitation policies do help manufacturers to sell their BEV or new energy vehicles in those big cities. But I would say this kind of policy is very much undermine the overall interest of the auto industry. You have to bear in mind for the year of 2015 and 2017, vast majority of BEV and new energy vehicles are sold in the cities implementing purchasing limitation policies. I don't know the possibilities in Europe if we can have such kind of purchasing limitations in Paris, in Brussels, to help our industry to achieve the CO2 regulations target. That would be a very good idea. And sometimes your people should be very mean. In China, again, Shanghai and Beijing is an example. Several years ago, they have their specific city-based incentive policy, but which is causes heavily criticized from the industry and from the people. How can you guys do things like that? Everything should be same, should be nationwide, unified. Sometimes the competitions and the stimulations is also very important. For the year of 2019, before that, actually, China proactively invited Tesla come to China. For the beginning of 2019, the Tesla's Gigafactory in Shanghai break ground. And the last day of this year, Tesla delivered the first car to their customers. I would say around the year of 2018 and 19, Tesla is very difficult. And Elon Musk seized the opportunities offered by Chinese government, and they survived, and they changed the China auto industry, new energy vehicle sectors. And I think they also changed the global new energy vehicle sectors. And you know the story afterwards. 2 years after, the 1 million Tesla rolled off from the production line of their Gigafactory in Shanghai. They fully utilize the resource of a supply chain in China. You also need a pandemic. For the year of around the year of 2014 and 15, the 3 very important new energy vehicle startup company was born in China. Is NIO, XPeng, and Li Auto. But as you remember, for this year, it's very difficult. Before the year of 2019, these 3 companies are very close to bankruptcy. But then the outbreak of a pandemic have a sad impact. For new energy vehicle startup companies, it's very easy to raise the capital from the financial market, especially the foreign financial market. So they immediately got money, support from the financial market, and they survived. And together with Tesla, they use their revolutionary design and the innovative product strategy completely transformed the landscape of new energy vehicles in China. You can see from the year of 2021, suddenly people realized a lot of preconditions like infrastructures, customers' acceptance, and supply chain, everything is ready. That's why for the year of 2021, there's a huge growth for new energy vehicle in China. But for this year, there's no important national strategy or policy was issued at that moment. Of course, the Chinese government is always very nervous. They are very nervous about if they made the right choice. So they keep preparing and implement the requirement for new energy vehicles to ensure their qualities, to ensure the customer like the new energy vehicles, and the vehicles are the same. But those they set a lot of additional requirement for the industry. I would say this is an extra burden for the manufacturers. And in China, if there's your BEV or your PHEV is catch a fire, the manufacturers have to report this this accident within 6 hours to the government authorities to tell them what happens. It's very crazy. In China, actually, we have a RTM, the real-time monitoring systems. Sometimes, especially for several years ago, in case there's a lot of fair case actually is informed by the manufacturer or by government rather than by driver themselves. They suddenly got a phone call, hey, your car is very cool, but it's on fire. But it's real on fire, it's catch a fire. So the system works, yes. Yes, Bahong just mentioned in China, we have the most complicated new energy vehicle regulations in this planet. But I would say at this moment now it's number 2. Number 1 is our EU battery regulations, much more complicated than this one. But I would say in addition to the new energy vehicle quota target, they also touch a lot of parameters, which ensure the quality of the new energy vehicles is good. And they use these regulations to shape the development of new energy vehicles, like E-range, like energy densities. And for this year, they are considering to add a new parameters, is a low temperature performance, because in the cold area, sometimes during the winter time, your battery have a problem for the E-range issues. As a Beijing office, actually, we are sometimes from time to time being asked if our manufacturers, if foreign manufacturers are being treated unfairly by Chinese government. I would say at this moment, it's very difficult to find a case or evidence that we are being treated unfairly in China. I will give you some examples. Like it's crazy for MOFCOM, Ministry of Commerce in China. They even set up a sending task force. It's called Foreign Automotive Company Service Task Force. So for us, only for foreign manufacturers, in case you have any problems, just give them a call for anything, for regulations issues. And I just share you a story. It's real, but I won't say the company's name. The CEO, global CEO, come to China. Suddenly, he want to have a try about the high-speed train of China. But the ideas came up too late, so all the tickets are sold out. But he still want to try the high-speed train. And then his colleagues made a phone call to MOFCOM and to this, our CEO need a additional cabin. They do make a phone call to the local railway stations. Of course, the feedback is no, but in a very polite way. Sorry, we tried, but we failed. It's a high-speed train. It's very dangerous to add another cabin to this train. But it's true. And MOFCOM also have a very only foreign companies exclusive complaints system which only work for foreign companies, not for local companies. It's crazy, huh? For foreign company, if you have any problems, difficulties, you can make a phone call, write an email to, and MOFCOM try to resolve problems for you. And for the industry in China, it's crazy. We have two type of pool systems. But for local manufacturers, they have to go through both of them. But for import cars, import vehicles, they only go one of them, which save a lot of cost and time for us. And for the regulations, there's a very important and demanding regulations of single vehicle fuel consumption regulations. And these regulations only applies to locally made vehicles. And all import vehicles are exempt from these regulations. With this exemption, our beautiful car, from our members, like a Bentley, Lamborghini, like a Rolls-Royce can enter into China market. But it's not the case for locally made vehicles. So local manufacturers are quite unhappy about that. And as for, this is a picture of this June's meetings in Brussels and Europe, because China is preparing, I think, the world #1 single vehicle-based electricity consumption regulations. But after our successful meetings, and we share a lot of evidence, the Chinese government decided to offer 20% derogations for foreign manufacturers. It's a little bit crazy, huh? Especially for these pictures. It's in our ACEA Beijing office. We are discussing to offer exemptions for the BEV from Europe to China. And 100 meters away, we are discussing to offer additional duty for the BEV from China to Europe. But we made it. Yeah. The technical regulation system is very much international. 70% of China technical regulations is similar or 100% same as the European regulations. As CS members in China, I would say for the China market, we still have a huge market development potential in China. This is you can see this is a 1,000 people's ownership for the vehicles. In Europe, it's about 600, but here in China, it's only over 200. We still have room. And this is a survey made by state information centers. It shows that even for very young people in China, they have a very strong preference for international brand. They believe in us, the qualities, the brand image, the network. And this is very important. This is a summary of the perfect for the major automakers all around the world. For the blue one, is international manufacturers. For the red one is Chinese manufacturers. I was told that for last year, the total profit of the top 10 Chinese makers is less than Toyota. So we have money. The customer behavior, this is a summary of what I made. This is the top selling BEV in these 6 countries. These 6 countries account for 73% of new car registration in the world. Besides Japan, everywhere is Tesla Model Y or Model 3. So you don't need to concern about the customer's behavior or preference. If you have a beautiful and nice BEV, everyone love it. This is a summary about ACEA's members in China, but I think everyone know it. China plays a very important role for our international European manufacturers in China, in the world. As a brief summary, it's an open market. Everyone are welcome. If you have a good product, you can earn money from customers' pocket. That's very simple, and this is a conclusions. A small summary. In fact, the development of China new energy vehicles is a long and difficult journey full of surprise and even accident. And I would say the long-term nationwide and the unified incentive policy works on both for the consumer side and the infrastructure side play a very important role. And the market share of new energy market share of 20% in China. You have to bear in mind in China, it takes Chinese auto industry for 20 years to achieve this target. It's an achievement made by the huge investment and effort and even sacrifice from the government, from the industry, and from the people. With 20 years struggle or efforts, a comprehensive new energy vehicle supply chain has been established in China. Now the question is for us to reduce the dependencies or enjoying the achievement is a company's strategy or choice. I would say one thing at that moment, although now China is the #1 BEV market and industry in the world, but to ban ICE is not on the table of the China government. They never think about it. Summaries for our members in China. Although we are facing great challenge at the moment, but we should have confidence for ourselves. We have a brand image, we have a network, we have a quality, and we do have much more global experience comparing with Chinese local manufacturers. And most importantly, we have money comparing with Chinese manufacturers. The only thing missing is a beautiful BEV. And Tesla is so different, I know, but Tesla do set examples for us. Some reflections for what we, for EU and the European, our colleagues here in Europe. This year and last year, market share of new energy vehicles in Europe has already achieved 20%. But I think it only takes us 5 years. I think the very first year is the year of 2019. I think that should be described as a great achievement rather than crisis. We are 15 years quicker than China. We made a great effort. Of course, the Commission, the government authorities set ambitious climate target and a global competitiveness as a target. But I would say if we achieve these two targets in very short time and at the same time, which is of course very extremely challenging for us. And we can of course achieve the target of zero emission, of course, but the matter is how fast and how expensive it is. European-wide, EU-wide, unified and long-term incentive policies work on demand and infrastructure side will be very much needed, and we deserve it. You have to bear in mind in China, we implemented 13 years purchasing incentive subsidies and another 13 years tax exemptions. And for US, they just implement the IPR, also work for 10 years. It's a long-term and it's a unified policies. Production cost is higher, yes, but what we can reduce the cost for the sector in other area, I don't know if I can say it or not. The penalty of CO2 regulations is quite high. What if we can reduce it somehow? I don't know, it's only for my personal inputs. Yeah, I would say at this moment, the current situation is very similar, I think, with the EV development of the year of 2017 to 2020. We are very close to the sunrise, but the industry needs more support and driving force. The last slide, I think I'm a little bit behind the schedule, and we will celebrate our 20 years anniversary. Actually, we are preparing several toolbox to help everyone to quickly understand what's going on in China. The first one is so-called EU-China 100. We selected 100 items and made comparisons between EU and China. You can easily, quickly have an understanding what is the difference between China and Europe. And we also prepared 4 documents. It's China auto industry by data and the China industry's government authorities and governance system of auto industry in China and the China automobile industry technical regulations. At least that document will be free for our members. I will check with Pierre if it's free for other colleagues. Yes. So this is my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Shuo. Very interesting presentation. I think that gives you a bit of an idea that here we see the Chinese EVs as being a near miraculous thing. They pop up overnight, but in reality, they're the fruit of a much longer sustained effort, sustained strategy. It didn't happen overnight. It also gives you an idea that this is, again, a more nuanced industry, and we see the domestic Chinese industry as being very bold and self-assured, but in reality, things are vastly more complex. So I would like then to take the rest of the session, as I mentioned earlier, to hold a Q&A session with the three of us on stage. Welcome all questions from everyone. Please, if you do ask a question, do very briefly introduce yourself, say who you are and where you work. And you can, of course, direct your question at someone in specific, but I think you can also ask an open question and we will do our best to answer it. So you can start. I don't know if there's any bold soul who will want to start, but then I would like to open the floor to all questions.
Working for SQM, a lithium producer. And I'm just back from a trip to China last week. And in the cities that I visited, I was impressed by the fact that new energy vehicles have a green plate. So it's a very concrete,
it's a very ugly green plate.
very concrete sign of the benefits that a vehicle like that can bring. And in Europe at the moment, EVs are seen a bit as a symbol of the problems and the clashes that the energy transition can bring. So I was just curious if you could elaborate a bit on this point on the acceptance of EVs and new energy vehicles in Europe, and if there are some lessons that we can learn from China. Of course, beyond all the incentives and all the things that you have already explained. Thank you.
So you mean the lessons rather than good practice?
Or I think is acceptance from the point of view of consumers, right? What people like about EVs, how they welcome EVs, and how what motivates also buyers to go for an EV as opposed to an ICE car.
Yes, I think I will share one idea just come to in my mind, but not everything. You just have a very huge questions. I think at that moment, from the very beginning, everyone think the development of a new energy vehicle, especially for BEV, should be starting from a very small, cheap, mini BEV. But after Tesla come to China, it's turned out maybe it's good. Let's start from the at least premium cars, luxury cars, expensive cars, because I think it is a nature for new things, for good things, for cutting edge technology. That means expensive. That means you cannot let the regular person like me or poor persons to play a role as a pioneer to lead the development of a new energy vehicles, right? Especially for people, I would say for luxury, for people who buy premium BEVs, they have bigger house, which means they have room for charging, and they can gain a lot of more practice immediately, rather than a family that live in an apartment. It's very difficult to find a charging pals. I think this is one idea come to my mind, and Tesla's Model S do offer us a very good examples in the year of 2017 in China. Again, this is not only answer. There's a lot of answer for this question.
For me, I mean, we constantly debate within the circle of foreign OEMs, and of course within my organization, that why, I mean, what exactly happened. And of course, I mean, there are, like what we said earlier, it's a combination of different factors. But one, I think that when Europeans, look at their own cars, I mean, I like my VWs, of course. But, certain traits of a car, that people in other parts of the world consider super important are not necessarily so in the Chinese market, right? I mean, because there's a speed limit, right? I mean, you can't drive your car that fast on autobahn, right? I mean, in Chinese roads. However, that's more than compensated by other features, like the interactive features with the car, because the Chinese, especially the young generation of consumers, are obsessed with smartphones, right? I mean, so I mean, if you sit in the cabin and there's the cockpit and everything, I mean, it's just like your phone has been migrated seamlessly into your car, and the screen gets way larger and it's humongous. I mean, there are so many things you can touch on. I mean, you know what I mean. You know where I'm getting at. So this is one attraction, and not to mention China is well on its way. I mean, manufacturer OEMs and other businesses are well on their way. I mean, to build an ecosystem that would actually be commercially meaningful. So eventually, I mean, now we're talking about beyond mechanical performance, beyond manufacturing, beyond robot that move stuff, and beyond assemblies. We're talking about an ecosystem where you live in, and everything is at your fingertip, and it's just a pod that's mobile, and so that's one thing that drives Chinese car industry forward.
Well, just a question concerning the energy sector, because here in Europe we have a struggle with the infrastructure and the charging situation. And how did China transition with such a speed, seeing those huge increases of the number of vehicles that were put on the market in a quite short amount of time? So how did the energy sector achieve this fast transition?
It's a very good questions, but we are from auto industry, and but anyway, first of all, as I just mentioned, in the year of 2014, China published and implement a nationwide incentive policies for charging infrastructure sectors, which play a very important roles. And another thing is, I think the two power companies, national power companies, they do play a very important role. And the third answer replies for me is recently this year, the Chinese government issued two nationwide white paper. One is from the National Energy Bureau, and the second one is from ME, the Ministry of Environmental and Ecology. They have a systematically introduction about what's going on for the energy sectors and the change for especially for the charging infrastructures sectors. A lot of data. I can send you later. I think there are English version as well. Maybe Bahong have something more regarding the charging.
The power mix of China. I mean, in the past, of course, I mean it was a problem, right? And the coal plays a more than necessary role in the entire mix, and the Chinese government was acutely aware of that problem, and so they set out to address that issue. And I think the current installed capacity of power generation, so more than 50% goes to renewable energies. So, and also specifically, that China built like wind farms in the northwest and offshore, that, and for that specific infrastructure, and China had to sort of, I'm not sure if China invented it, but it's something called ultra high voltage power transmission system that goes up to 800 kilovolt. I mean, that's the voltage level, so that long distance power transmission, I mean, there will be minimal to minimize the loss of power, because the renewable energy generation bases are either offshore or hydropower in the mountain areas or wind farms in the vast northwestern areas. So, and also another factor that Shuo briefly mentioned, which I actually want you to sit on it, is the fear of the concern, the great concern of energy security, which, in my personal opinion, is the primary driver for China to do, the power transition, and of course the e-mobility revolution. So all this together actually propelled China to invest heavily into renewable energy and e-mobility.
There's something I can add as well. I think even not until now, or at least at the very beginning, when there is the consumer incentive subsidy still works, it's obligations for the manufacturers. If you want to enjoy consumer subsidies, you have the obligations. If someone buy a BEV from your company, you have to responsible for install a charging pills for these customers. Only in case, of course, if they have a garden, of course, but these are obligations. The consumer can choose you have or you don't have this charging pills, but it's totally free, and you have to do it as part of after sales obligations. And this is a very important regulations for manufacturers.
Hello, Marie-Hélène Covanes from ACEA, so I'm a colleague of Shuo. Maybe a follow-up question on the infrastructure. So in the EU, what we see is that typically people who drive electric vehicles, they have access to private infrastructure. Is it also the same situation in China where private infrastructure is more prominent than public infrastructure, or is it the other way around? And also similar question on the electricity price. Again, here in the EU, typically if you charge at the public charging spots, you pay more than if you were to charge in your home. Is it also similar in China, or there are also, or the price of electricity is the same regardless of where you charge?
Let me ask you a second question. If I'm wrong, correct me. I think at least for if you charge your car in your home or outside for a public charging pail, there's a little bit difference, but very small. Because if you charge your car in a public charging pails, of course the manufacturers of this poles will charge you for some service fee. That's all. Because normally, if you charge a public charging post, that will be run a charging operators. And you, of course, you download the apps and you pay on your phone. And this from the app you can find other charging posts run by this operator, something like that. It's a service fee, but I would say very cheap. It's almost same, of a little bit difference. As for the percentage, I to be honest, I don't have a specific figures, but one thing I'm sure, at least in China, in the mega city, I think the living conditions in China is not as good as we have in Europe. Majority of people live in apartment, so I think people using public charging infrastructure is a little bit more than at least for private charging infrastructure.
Yeah, I don't have the figure on the top of my head, but I think overwhelmingly, public charging piles are way more than private charging pillars. That's for sure. And I think that it's kind of funny that a lot of people, they can afford PHEVs, plug-in hybrids, and electric cars. And I've noticed, it's because electricity in China is cheap. I mean, it's especially for household electric bills. I mean, it's dirt cheap compared to other parts of the world. And so, for example, if you drive a plug-in hybrids and you are not necessarily limited to, and you don't have to go to charging stations. But since the gap, right, between gasoline and electricity is so big in China, whereas I guess it's not so big here in Europe or in Deutschland, people just want to charge. I mean, they will make the extra effort to charge because they end up feeling they earned money. You know what I'm saying? Because it's gone viral on the internet, Chinese internet, and then people just go to places and charge, whereas they don't have to. And then they would tell other people like, look, I save so much money.
And indeed, I think I can add to what both are saying. From a foreigner's perspective in China, there's an impressive public charging infrastructure. And for this relatively small service fee that you mentioned, you can access very high-speed charging. You can see up to 300 plus kilowatt chargers nowadays, that are, relatively speaking, compared to what we have here, fairly abundant. And as you mentioned also, I mean, we've seen, depends on where in Europe, but for example, just here in Belgium, people buying plug-in hybrids because there are consumer incentives and so on, but not necessarily being so mindful when it comes to charging them because there's not so much of an incentive to charge them. Whereas, as you say, things are very different in China. People are actually strongly financially incentivized to go and charge them, right? So they actually use them as such.
Right.
Hello, thank you very much for the both presentations. I think they have been one of the most interesting presentations I have seen in Brussels over the last 15 years.
Thank you very much.
I am Emir Demircan from Infineon Technologies. We are Europe's largest semiconductor company and world's largest automotive semiconductor company. In Brussels, there's hardly now any meeting without starting, when it comes to electrification, decarbonization, electromobility, without starting China. And at least at the policy level, commission level, or member state level, parliament level, we immediately go towards unfair subsidies, non-market practices, overcapacities. This is basically how the discussion is structured at the policy level. Yet in your presentations, although they were very informative and interesting, you didn't mention this kind of concerns that here in Europe we have at the policy level. My question will be how you see this difference here at the policy level, the success, the numbers that you showed in China are tied to unfair subsidies, non-market practices, and overcapacities. Whereas in China, the view is about competitiveness, technology, innovation, other policies. Why do we have such a big gap in understanding and definition of the problems? Thank you.
Yeah, it's another big and interesting questions. I try to answer or echo something. But I think in China, it's very similar with here. Government are do their job. Manufacturers are doing our jobs. As for manufacturers, at least for Chinese manufacturers, they are focusing on how to develop a new car for the market for next month or 2 months later. And the government do something for the industry. The EU commissions are doing something to promote the interests of the EU sectors. And the Chinese government is trying to do something to prevent or promote Chinese manufacturers' interests. And I think both EU and China realize there's a strong cooperation or correlations between EU and China auto industries. So I think that can be, for my, at ACEA Beijing actually, we discuss it not very often, but my recommendations as manufacturers, what our missions is, let's develop a beautiful, popular, cool car. That's the only thing. So to discuss the overcapacities or whatever, I won't say it's make too much sense. It's a reality. It's a fact. And we need a sales figure to grow next week or next month. That's business. I don't know if I answer your questions.
It's really that ultimately what you point out. I think from the point of view of we're not policymakers,
Yeah.
ultimately, right? We're in the business of making cars and trucks, and that's about as far as it goes. And I think what you mentioned, yes, indeed, in the European public discourse is what we hear a lot. But I think if you were to talk even to our members, car manufacturers in Europe, you would hear something that's a bit more nuanced. Because obviously, yeah, for manufacturers in Europe to have a potential influx of new competitors that are quite EV savvy, well, is a risk, right? It's a threat in a sense. But at the same time, many, if not nearly all of our members have substantial stakes in China as well. They have business that they conduct there that has been, it's been a really key trade relationship for them for decades now. And even this drive to develop EV technology in China has served some of them to some extent. Any of the batteries that we have, not all of them, of course, but some of the batteries come from China and so on. So again, there is a more complex relationship than what we may hear here, that, yeah, it's all about, all those illegal subsidies and so on. There's reality, I think, is a bit more nuanced than that.
Hello, good morning. Oscar Pandillo for Amlex. Thanks for the conference, really interesting indeed. I would like to know what's your perspective, your forecast for the next few months and years for the Chinese market, taking into account that two major trade partners, such as Europe, the European Union, and the US, are getting more and more hostile for Chinese production. First, the European Union with these definitive anti-subsidy duties, and now with Donald Trump back in office. I would like to know if the Chinese market is strong enough to absorb all this production that maybe was meant to be exported, and yeah, what's your perspective on this matter? Thank you.
I think Mr. Su's introductions give you some answers already for about China's attitude and policies for other countries is opening up. It's a repeat and repeat by the central government. I think that will be a policy stick in China for coming decades or maybe forever. But let's keep it simple. It's very easy. China need the world, and the EU need the world. The US need the world. So that's a very simple message or logic, I think. And as for President Trump, it's a very good question. Actually, ASEA, we have American members as well in China. GM is also our members, official members in China. So during our discussion, I realized this is a very difficult question, even for American companies. So what else? And if the new government administrations will revise their fleet average fuel consumption CO2 regulations in the futures, people don't know. And there's a lot of rumors that the US will create Paris Agreement again. So there's a lot of uncertainties, I would say.
More than anything else, indeed, I think that the recent American election has introduced many question marks, more than answers, really. But yeah, I mean, again, you're looking at essential trade partnerships, and I like sometimes looking at this to take a bit of perspective, to look at the long game. Because if we go back here in Europe, roughly 30-ish years ago or a bit more. Some of you may remember, or may be old enough to remember, that the Japanese manufacturers at the time started coming to Europe. And there was a lot of hand-wringing and so on, and how this should be approached, even within ASEA itself, what to do with those new manufacturers that become member and so on. It was seen to some extent as a potential threat. They came. Eventually, they did what any auto manufacturer that wants to be successful and well implemented somewhere has to do, that you have to localize your operations to some extent. We're starting to see this in part with the Chinese industry. I mean, it's certainly part of their plans. And, the planet didn't stop spinning. The world did not end. It just became part of the automotive fabric. Now, of course, we're witnessing still a bit of an upheaval, and a period that also creates those tensions and so on. But what will it mean on the long run? We're going to reach a point of equilibrium, and it's not. I don't think it's going to be the end of the world for anyone either, right?
I mean, I don't know if we have time, but just to answer a question, one of the early projects that I did at Volkswagen, it was in 2001. We worked together with the DRC, which is the abbreviation for the Development and Research Center for the Chinese State Council. And so at that point, of course, Volkswagen was the dominant force in the Chinese car market. And so the top leadership wanted a project that would provide an objective analysis on the potential impact on the Chinese car industry once China joined the WTO, because at that point, a lot of folks were saying, if we did that, the influx of import will crush the fledgling Chinese car industry. So it took us about a year, right, to study, to analyze, and eventually we came up, with our conclusion, which is no, that's not going to happen. So instead, in China actually reaped handsome rewards from joining the WTO, from allowing ASEAN members and other car companies from other companies to play in the Chinese market, and then the spillover effect. And Chinese learned a lot from working together with these foreign players, and here we are today. So China knows that staying open is the only option, even though there might be forces that would make it much more difficult for China, but there's actually no other option. So when I said they mean it, I guess they mean it. So is China well prepared? I don't know. We'll have to see. What happens comes next January.
I think we have time for one more question, certainly. Or maybe two.
My name is Antoine de Kort. I'm from the National Vehicle Authority in the Netherlands, RDW. Thank you both for the very interesting presentations, and it clarified how big the success was for this plan on NEVs. And I was wondering if there is a similar policy plan in China for the intelligent and connected vehicles, and what the manufacturers are preparing on that area.
Yes, this question is very easy to answer. At this moment, there's no existing national strategy for ICV, intelligent connected vehicles. But this year, China do implement 2 nationwide pilot projects for intelligent connected vehicles. One is focused on vehicle side, another one is focusing on the infrastructure side. It's called Vehicle Cloud and Infrastructure Integration project. Pierre was there, and Pierre also we have ASEA members exclusive meetings with MIT regarding the first one for the nationwide pilot project for the level 3 and above autonomous driving pilot project. I think that project might be the biggest at this moment, biggest autonomous driving pilot project in the world.
Mr. de Kort, as much as I want to answer your question in Chinese, for the sake of the room, I'll still do it in English. So I would like to address that question from a different perspective. So for e-mobility, like what I said in my presentation, the government knew that relying 100% on the market would not make the cut, would not get the job done. So that's why they, came in heavily, with money and regulations. And then, when the market matured, decided to pull out, phased out, the monetary incentive and all that. Whereas for the, we call it ICV, intelligent and connected vehicle, number one, the government coffer is not, as good as it was. And number two, the government actually sees a lot of demand, real demand from consumers, right? So that's why the government would not incentivize the industry, the ICV, as it did on NEVs. So it's primarily market-driven, as I see it. And number two, there have been talks, from outside China that, fear might be the right word, that, and China will pursue an entirely different system from the rest of the world. Like, China will heavily focus on infrastructure, and the cars, will just can only operate within the confine of the infrastructure. But again, personally, I want to say no, that is also not the case, because number one, following what I said earlier, the government does not have that amount of money, right? Because Chinese government can't just print money, because the Chinese yuan is not a dollar, right? You can't do that. So they cannot finance that massive of a infrastructure to do that. I mean, it's extremely costly. And so they actually need business cases. Number two, in the absence of a ubiquitous and extremely intelligent infrastructure like RSUs and all that, Chinese OEMs have caught up with their own, developed their own technologies, right? Just onboard technologies, right? Similar to Tesla, whoever that's out there. So, I mean, if Chinese government decides to pursue entirely different strategy, that would mean all the efforts and resources of indigenous technology investment would go into waste. So basically, the government has repeatedly been saying that we want to stay neutral on these technical roadmaps, right? I mean, whichever that wins, I mean, the market will be the decider. I mean, we're just there trying to regulate, right, to help push these things forward. So at least this is how I see it, based on my interaction and engagement with Chinese authorities and industry.
I think then, Jonathan, perhaps, yeah.
Written with ACEA. Zhang, one of the most eye-catching statistics you showed in your presentation was the market share of foreign brands in China. Very steep decline over the last 3-4 years. I would like to ask you and Mr. Shuo, just what are your expectations in terms of market share, let's say for the foreseeable future, the next year or two? Is that going to bottom out? I mean, your data also showed real massive growth in NEV, particularly for plug-in hybrids, as foreign brands become more competitive in that space. Do we see that bottom out, or we see the trend continue? Just kind of expectations for next year or two.
I actually don't know. I mean, I want us to at least maintain what we have. But just to quote Mr. Wang, chairman of BYD, he said, yeah, less than 10%. He went public saying that. I don't know. I don't know what made him say that, because if you meet that guy in person, I mean, he's got a pretty soft demeanor. I mean, he's soft-spoken guy. But again, I mean, both Shuo and myself, I mean, we stressed in our presentation today for you all that we need to fight. I mean, we need to stay competitive. I mean, it's not a given. I mean, in the past, 40 years ago, I mean, we barely had to try, because it was non-existent. The industry is non-existent in China, and private car ownership was not a thing until early 2000s, right? So whatever that you have developed in your mind about car ownership, about car industry outside China, right? Do not necessarily apply to China. So unfortunately, I cannot give you a figure of what shares we may maintain 5 years down the road, but I want to say it's definitely going to be more than 10%, right? Because we got ACEA in China, so ACEA will fight for us, hopefully.
And 10% of China is still a lot of cars, right? I mean, that's a big market that we're looking at, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
We should be more ambitious than that.
Yeah, definitely.
Some very brief echo for the expectations. Actually, as you can see, for now, for new energy vehicles sold in China, about 60% of them are BEV and 40% of them are PHEV. There's a lot of predictions or forecasts that will be for next year. There will be quickly to be a 50-50 for new energy vehicles. And there's another thing which I think is equally important, is that we might be pay still at this moment too much about the new energy vehicles. You have to bear in mind at this moment there's another 40 or 45 or 50% of new cars sold in China are ICE vehicles, and they bring money and profit to the industry. And the first 50% means about 13 or 12 million vehicles, which is the same size of the total EU's. That's a huge market, and they bring profit for the industry. Don't forget it. Yes.
Is it? Can we say maybe a bit of a trick question, but that for European manufacturers, their future in China depends a lot on having good European BEVs?
I don't know how to answer your questions, but the problem is all ASEAN members are international manufacturers. We are global players. That is very good, but that also offers us a disadvantage. We have too many choice. We are having a buffet, and we have an African market, ASEAN market, European market, US market. Anyway, we had for some markets still quite okay, and in those markets there is no CO2 regulations. People still prefer the ICE vehicles, so we have too many choice. But for the BYD, the company like BYD for China domestic manufacturers, at this moment they are still focused on the China market. So for them, there's no so many choice. Only new energy vehicles, it's very clear. So they use all their resource on the new energy vehicles. So now this is a question for ourselves. How can we decide our strategy, which one is best? I think different company has different ideas.
I mean, just a short comment, and if everyone here, if we could switch roles, I mean, try to put ourselves in the shoes of Chinese car makers 10 years back. I mean, I want to say when they look at us, like Volkswagen and General Motors, like BMW, they look at us with frustration and despair, and it's overwhelming advantage from European automakers or Japanese or Americans. But now a lot of my colleagues, when they look at Chinese car makers, they might feel the same, slightly different, but about the same. So we are playing the catch-up game there. And my employer, had invested over 10 billion euros since the first year of COVID in China, try to partner up with different players in China, try to learn the new tricks, on batteries, on digitalization and software, right? And it's an open market, right? It's up to you. How you manage your stuff, how you manage your business. But if you can make it, that's entirely up to you, right? It's tough, right? They want you there. They let you in the game, right? But you have what it takes to stay alive there. That's an entirely different question. And we don't have time today, but Shuo and I, we could have also, just to provide some solace in all this frustrating situation, their worries, their fears, it is not unbeatable, but everyone has their own problems. But unfortunately, we don't have time for that today.
I do have the distinct feeling that we could keep this going for quite some time, but
yeah,
unfortunately, I'm mindful of time because we also have another event this afternoon. So I would like, first and foremost, to very much thank both of our speakers. Thank you for making the very long trip. This is not like you're coming from Germany or Ireland. This certainly is a longer one. We're not going anywhere for the time being. Thank you all for coming. I would like to point out, of course, that this being the ACEA Experience Center downstairs, we also have a variety of exhibits from our members of all kinds. Some are more interactive, some allow you to see new technology. So please do feel free to have a look. And well, thank you very much for coming. I hope you enjoyed, and perhaps then see you again in other ACEA events. Thank you so much.